You're listening to Counselors on the Couch, an open conversation between counselors, coaches, and specialists discussing how people just like you can solve a multitude of challenges. Counselors on the Couch is hosted by Dr. Chuck Carrington. We invite you now to join us on the couch to listen in as Dr. Chuck and his specialist guests and experts candidly share insider information on how they help solve the problems that drive people into counseling.
Week 11, one more to go. Today's about do-overs. And do-overs, at least the way I look at it, is once you have come to the end of the process and you're hopefully managing the grief and the trauma and the recovery and all that stuff, you still have to re-enter life. Mm-hmm. And when you re-enter life, you certainly don't want to re-enter it and do the same thing that you did before and wind up in the same place, which is unfortunately very common, probably more common than it's not. We tend to make the same mistakes. So by studying our own personal history, hopefully we can overcome that, overcome the tendency to repeat. But we have to have a plan to go forward. And in grief work, it's always, we call it restoring. We create a new story that we move towards. And I think that's really important. So what's a do-over? And a do-over, from hindsight, is what did you do to start your new life after the divorce? And I know we were talking about it earlier. We all had our one thing. My one thing, actually it was two things. I bought my kids a big screen TV because I had the money to do it and they had always wanted one and I didn't have to ask anybody. So I went out and bought one. Back then they were a lot more expensive than they are now. Mm-hmm. Spent like $600 for a TV. The kids were excited and I still have that TV. The second thing was it was right before Christmas. We'd always put up this one particular artificial tree. It was a nice tree, but it represented to me 20 years of a particular ritual that had become less pleasant. So I went down and I bought 3 trees, little redwood trees, 3 different heights, and I put them up because I always liked the tale of 3 trees for Christmas. It was kind of a Christmas tradition I would tell my kids. And so I put up 3 trees because that was mine. And that was the beginning of my new life, was making a decision for me. And everything else that happened after I felt like it was okay to make decisions for me. So that was my reboot. I'm curious, you guys, or guy, lady, what was your first new thing that told you it was your life again?
The one thing that I did, and I mentioned this earlier also, is that when it came time that yes, I was indeed going to leave, I really left. I packed up the car with my kids and whatever stuff I felt important, left everything else behind and drove down to my parents' house. And so that was a big step for me to step away from that, but it was also a huge relief. As far as do-overs, I can't think of anything at a specific moment. There are probably a number of different things that came along as I healed that enabled me to move forward. Because when I'm thinking of do-overs, I think of, moving forward. I can think of a number of things I didn't want to do over again. I was never, ever going to get married again. I was never even going to be in a relationship again. That was the furthest thing from my mind. So if I were to look at when I left in 1991 to where I am today, there was a series of do-overs that were not conscious do-overs. They were getting to know myself, growing in confidence, just the fact that I didn't have to do what I did for 10 years, as far as which was just surviving and trying to keep my sanity. So do-overs, I got my life back. I got a life back by trusting in God, quite frankly, and letting him move in me even when I wasn't aware of it. I was able to grow and move more towards who he wanted me to be. So that's part of my biggest do-over, is moving towards where God wants me to be.
I got to follow up on that, but I got to hear from James first.
Yeah, I've said this in some of the earlier podcasts, is that when you get divorced, life as you knew it is over. And you have to start over again. And so 6 months after my marriage fell apart, my company laid off 20% of its workforce. And as an executive for the company, I was one of the 900 people that lost their job because my job was eliminated. So I was living in Richmond, Virginia at the time, and I bought a house in Virginia Beach and some years previously. So when that happened, I just said, okay, yeah, life as I knew it is over. I got to start over again. And so I took everything that was in the little apartment that I was living in, and I moved to Virginia Beach. That actually, at the time, was unbelievably difficult. But in retrospect, it was probably the wisest thing that I did, because since things were truly over and the other party had no interest at all in trying to restore the marriage, it forced me to start to learn how to be on my own again. It forced me to learn how to, move to a new city, start developing relationships, start developing friends, starting to get to know the city. And one of the most beneficial things that I did after moving down here is that I joined the Virginia Beach Volunteer Rescue Squad, which gave me something to do 2 days a week, because I volunteered 2 days a week. It also gave me a network of people to start interacting with. It also helped me move beyond myself, because running rescue, you're there, it's volunteer, you don't get paid. It's the largest volunteer rescue system in the country. So you get to meet a lot of people, but you're there basically to serve, and you're there to serve others. So all of those things, although I didn't understand it at the time, I did them because I thought they were the right thing to do. But in looking back, retrospectively, they were all just absolutely critical steps in being able to pick up the pieces and start to heal and start over again.
So that actually follows the same pattern that Kathy was just talking about, to move towards where God wants you to be, whether you know it or not. You're doing that because, you and I've talked about this, James, quite a bit about personalities, and especially the Enneagram, because we happen to share the same personality. We have the same hat too, which is cool. When you started following those prompts or those ideas, you're actually trying to follow what your personality has tried to have you do your entire life, and you just maybe weren't aware of it. I've learned this a long time ago. There's a thread that runs through our life of purpose that God puts in us. But when life gets busy or we're under stress, we kind of move to something different than God's perfect purpose for us. But when we need to get back to our life, to get back to our purpose, we tend to start doing the very things we've always tried to do, but we do them now intentionally. Your Enneagram personality was a 2.
Yes.
Same as mine, which is somebody who wants to serve others and has this deep empathy and caring. So rescue makes sense for you, just like what I do makes sense for me. And it's a way of connecting with people in an altruistic way. Well, that's your purpose. God made you that way.
Yes, it is. But the interesting thing about all of this, though, is that now that it's been a few years, it's almost like I got married when I was 21. And it's almost like I quit developing when I got married. Mm-hmm. And now that, I have a different life, once I moved to Virginia Beach, which was in February of 2019, I picked back up again and sort of felt like a 21-year-old. And I don't mean in regards to energy or anything. I'm just talking about maturity, because the issues that I had not dealt with the first 21 years of my life, I had to go back and start dealing with them again, because there were no more distractions. There were no more, diversions. And so you have to start dealing with that stuff, and you got to start working through it. I wish I would have done it 35 years previously, but I didn't. And so in a lot of ways, it's do-over has a much broader definition for me, because it was really trying to go back and to try to understand why I had made the decisions that I'd made, why I had made the choices that I'd made. What were my triggers? Where was unresolved pain and unresolved conflict that I had never, ever, worked through? And so you can interpret do-over in a lot of different ways, but for me, it was almost like completely starting over again, completely starting over as, a 4-year-old child in a 59-year-old body, and really trying to go back to the earliest memories and the earliest traumas and to the earliest brokenness and really trying to fix that.
And recover self.
Yes, because I was completely lost.
That's what Kathy was saying. She said, moving towards where God wants me to be. I wrote it down as you said it. That's recovering your true self from the person that you had become during that 10 years.
And I can say, actually, for me, it was more, I left that after 10 years. The relationship I was in was very harmful. But when I think about it, though, it was still, honestly, another 12 to 15 years after that I had a number of issues and things that happened with my children that I was honestly, I can say I was probably in fight or flight for all that time too. You know, for years, I was in that sense of just surviving. And then when Jim came into my life, that actually enabled me to start. We would say my do-over, or pushing the reset, because up till that point in time, I was battling so much, and I was battling life by myself. I had family that loved me, but family that didn't understand. So I was battling life by myself, and I just surviving, you know. And then Jim came in and put my kids through Jim's boot camp, and
Jim's boot camp.
That
sounds like a podcast right there.
Oh, Jim's boot camp was wonderful. But both of them, my kids love him so much now, and they respect him so much now, and they even thank him for the way he was with them. But anyways, so Jim came into my life. So that Jim was probably, you can say in some aspects, I did not marry him for a do-over, like for a do-over of a marriage relationship. But God put him in my life, because I was never, ever going to get married again. And he showed up, and my gosh, I always thought, who the heck would want to be with me with what I was carrying as far as my children in my life, the issues I was having with my children. You know, it would take a heck of a man to step in and say, oh, but he did. He was there right from the very beginning. So.
Yeah, you know, it's interesting. Thomas Wolfe wrote a novel back in the 1930s, called You Can't Go Home Again. But with Christ, you can't. You can go back to where you lost yourself, and you can start over, and you can heal, and you can move forward, and you can look forward to the future. Because, you know, as I mentioned in one of the earlier podcasts, you know, about divorce being like your house being burnt down. Yeah. I spent months and years trying to figure out how the fire started. You know, how did the fire start that burnt the marriage down? And that's just not even a concern anymore. It's not even a question anymore. It's about what's ahead of me. How is life going to be different? You know, I feel like I'm finally starting to turn the corner, where all of that is sort of in the past. But it takes a long time to redeem yourself. It takes a long time to find yourself again, to really, truly get to know who you are. And it takes a lot of support, because it's not something that, you know, you can easily find on your own.
Well, I know I am not the person I was when I married my kid's dad, and I'm not the person that I was when I left. And the person that I am today is something that I never would have imagined, simply because the fact that I was so timid and shy, especially around people. I wouldn't imagine that I would speak out, that I would do the things that I'm doing today. I wouldn't even picture that. And so just, you know, it's like, I think as far as, okay, you're leaving this, if a person is leaving a relationship, yeah, you want that do-over, but you want it real quick. You know, you want to just flip the page and start a new life and put everything behind you. But it doesn't work that way. You move step by step. And as new things are introduced in your life, new things start to come into your life when you've stepped away from a relationship that's been harmful, whether you got thrown out the door, or whether you're the one that chose to end it. And so you're just beginning anew.
Having gone through this now and looking backwards, at the time, that the separation occurred and looking at it now, I am not the person that I thought I was then.
Say more about that. That's important.
Yeah.
Who I thought I was then was defective, unworthy of love, getting what I deserved, with all the harshness and all of the abandonment and the rejection. I thought that's who I was. But that's not who I really was. But that's what my perception of myself was. So it's not so much becoming a different person as it is becoming the original person. Jesus said, except you become like little children, you won't enter the kingdom of heaven. We're supposed to live like little children. We're supposed to live carefree and trusting and believing and quick to forgive and quick to let go. That's who we're supposed to be. So when all of this stuff occurred, that's not who I was. And I did not believe who I really was. I had come to believe over the years a hologram that was a reflection of what other people and who other people told me I was. And so I defined myself by how others told me they saw me instead of really knowing who I was and defining myself regardless of what other people told me or what they expected of me.
That taps into something very real for people. Our image development has so much to do with how other people reflect back. And I think you and I have had this conversation, James, where if the mirror that's reflecting back to you isn't clear or smooth, it could be a funhouse mirror. If it isn't a good mirror, we get a warped sense of who we are. And sometimes it alters who we think we are. We behave differently. I have probably about 10 couple clients right now that are having real problems. COVID has really harmed marriages this last year because everybody's stuck in the house. They can't get away. And about half of the couples are telling me they don't like the person that they've become in their marriage. They don't like being that person. And they don't understand why they're stuck with that. And what they're not recognizing is the influence of the other person on their life has caused them to respond or react. And it's becoming a new habit, a new way of being. And it's not consistent with who they are supposed to be, called to be, or purposed to be, however you want to call it. And they don't recognize themselves anymore, but they do know they don't like it. And so coming out of divorce, at least from my anecdotal experience, when you come out of a divorce, you are not the person that you thought you were going into the marriage, whether because you've been damaged or because the worst has come out in you because maybe it is your fault. But you are not coming out of this marriage a whole person, a person that is healthy, a person that represents who you thought you were before the marriage.
Which isn't surprising because you probably didn't go into the marriage as a whole person.
For most of us, that's true. I know that was true for me.
That was certainly true for me as well.
But I came out of my marriage a very angry, bitter person. I didn't go into my marriage an angry, bitter person.
Mm-hmm. And one of the things that jumps out at me is we're talking about do-overs. It's not so much about do-overs. It's about becoming. Do-over means that the life that happened before, run away from it, get away from it. But the thing about that is the life you've had, ups and downs, contributes to who you become. So
good or bad, right?
Good or bad. So if so these things you don't, doing over is like, yeah, you do want to be able to begin something, but doing over to me means repeating. And so versus using, if you look over the course, those of us who are more mature in our years, have the advantage of more years on this earth, can look back at our lives and see how the different events in our lives have impacted us. But we can also see where God has entered into those and how God has used those things to help us grow and to change. Everything that I am today, good or bad, everything that I am today is because of all the things that I've experienced in my life, good or bad. And so, and I think at some point in time in our healing process, if we can look back at the events in our lives that were traumatic, that were horrible, that were painful, and realize and see how they actually were used for good. You take it and you put it in that perspective, then it doesn't look the same to you. It doesn't look, you don't want to go back there ever again.
And it doesn't have the same hold on you either.
Exactly.
I mean, the Bible says that God will give you beauty for ashes. Mm-hmm. And back to your other point, Kathy, that, that all things work together for good. And I love this, I love the movie The Shack, and Octavia Spencer is on the front porch. She plays the role of God, and she's like, if you trusted me and you knew how much I loved you, then you would know that everything going on in your life, I'm right in the middle of it, working it out for your good. Mm-hmm. The problem is that when you're in the middle of it, you just can't believe that any good will ever come out of this. But it can. Mm-hmm. You do have an opportunity to do over. You do have an opportunity to heal. You do have an opportunity to go back and look at this as a lesson learned, not as a definition of who you are. Mm-hmm. I've lived in many different states, okay? But that doesn't mean that I'm a Virginian. It's just happened to be where I lived. It's the same thing here. You can camp out there and you can define yourself by the trauma that you've been through your entire life, or it was just part of the things you experienced as you were moving forward.
You both used the word, or at least I know you used the word, James. I think I inferred it from Kathy, but to redeem your life. Mm. And I look at do-over as a second chance to recover the person that you had aspired to be in the first place. Maybe you lost her. Maybe to discover for the first time the person that you were meant to be, that you never actually actualized to, or never actually became in the first place. But to redeem means to recover. Mm-hmm. And God has a purpose for everybody in the beginning. Mm-hmm. We tend to wander away from it, either because of influences of others or because of choices. I went back to my home state about 10 years ago. I grew up in California. And when I went back there, I went back to all my old stomping grounds because I was just going to enjoy being where I remember being happy. Mm-hmm. But nothing was the same. So in that regard, you can't do it over. You can't go back and start over and do what you did the first time and repeat it and continue. It doesn't work that way. But you can go back and look and say, this is where my roots are. This is where I started. Now, where did I deviate from it? Mm-hmm. That's something that I was able to do. There's also a lot of grief in going back too far and looking, gosh, I missed my opportunity. So doing over sometimes is redeeming the very thing that you either lost or never had in the first place, mm-hmm. but moving forward with a higher calling, a higher ideal. And like you said, Kathy, you came out of your divorce and went into your new life with the idea that I will never trust or re-engage in a relationship towards marriage again. In the counseling world, we call it the second divorce. We divorce ourselves of future relationships. That's a normal reaction. The funny thing is, of the three of us sitting here, you're the one who got remarried. Of the three of us who all, I'm sure, entered divorce thinking never again, and I can't speak for James. I know I felt that way. You said you felt that mm-hmm. way. You are the one who got remarried, mm-hmm. and happily so. Mm-hmm. I have yet to even think about whether or not I would want to give up my autonomy again, because it didn't work out so good for me, and I'm actually very happy mm-hmm. now. I wasn't, but I am now. And since I don't want to, get people calling James, I don't know, James, I know that you're a much healthier person now than you were, 3 years ago?
Yes.
The truth is that in one from the previous issue of divorce care and the one prior to that, and it might even be available on the website. Tony Evans has this thing that he says about remarriage, about finding somebody to begin with. We think that we go to the bars and stuff like that, trying to find somebody. We do this to find somebody. But the truth of the matter is, God already knows who that person is for you. And if he's across the world, God will pick him up and teleport him to where you are. So don't seek.
Does it have to be
well, no, her in your case. The point of it is you don't seek a mate. You seek God,
yes.
and God will bring you your mate. And I think that doesn't have to do just with mates. It has to do with everything in life. We're seeking these things versus realizing if we just seek God and follow God, He will give us all the riches and He will give us what we need, not necessarily what we want, but what we need in our lives. And as far as regaining trust, regaining your trust in God is, because sometimes that gets shaken in the process here. You think, God, why me? Is building that relationship with God first before you even think about building a relationship with another human being.
I think there's wisdom in that. If you pursue God, He'll give you what He wants you to have, mm-hmm. and He'll give it to you happily, generously, completely. Mm-hmm. When you pursue, I want to be married, mm-hmm. you're going to find somebody that fits your mold, mm-hmm. in your time frame. Mm-hmm. And if you think about how you got to where you were in the divorce in the first place, you probably were seeking self to begin with. So why would you do that over? That's why do-overs are important, to look at what happened, mm-hmm. not to live in what happened, but to draw wisdom from what happened, mm-hmm. so that you can have a better plan going forward.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. There's a series of videos that Jim and I are watching. It's by, I think his name is Gary Thomas. What if, at Sacred Marriage, what if marriage were meant to make you holy instead of happy?
Well, whoever said marriage is supposed to make you happy?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah,
Disney.
But one of the points that he made, because we watched it since it was Valentine's Day, we figured it was a good one to watch yesterday. But we watched it again yesterday, that first one. There were a lot more things we picked up in it. But one of the things that Gary said in this about marriage is the fact that it's only been in more recent history that people married for love. Historically, especially back in biblical days, you didn't marry for love. Love was not an initial, and I think of Fiddler on the Roof, do you love me, the song. But so we marry for love when all those endorphins are going on and stuff like that. And we expect to be happy. And when we find that we're not happy, then we don't like the other person, or sometimes we don't like who we become, when you were talking about that. But it's just interesting that,
the myth of the happily ever after is a myth.
Right.
It's a assignment of priorities, mm-hmm. because happiness doesn't come as a goal. Happiness is actually an outcome of a series of choices, but there mm-hmm. are more important things in life. And consummate marriage doesn't actually have happiness as part of the ingredient. It's mm-hmm. commitment, it's passion, and it's friendship. Mm-hmm. And you get those three things and you do them well, you will be happy. Mm-hmm. But God didn't, I don't remember any scripture that says, I've called you to be happy. Mm-hmm. He wants us to live life abundantly, but He didn't say, am I happy?
So part of doing over is resetting your perceptions. You're resetting your perspective on things, as far as you may have initially wanted to get married because you wanted somebody, say, to take care of you. You wanted to be happy. You wanted this, you wanted that. But as you proceed in life after a divorce, after you have your life as you knew it was shattered, you have, as far as what your expectations are, hopefully in part of the do-over. You do over your expectations. You don't have the expectations of another person being responsible for your happiness.
Amen.
Well, but there's another side to do-over as well. And unfortunately you see this because 50% of first marriages end in divorce, 75% of second marriages end in divorce. And that many people go out and make exactly the same mistakes again. Mm-hmm. For those who don't remember history, they are destined to repeat it. And you see that a lot in divorce care. You see people who, are leaving husband number 2, sometimes husband number 3, or wife number 2 or wife number 3. And the reason for that, I think, I hope, is that if you don't learn and heal from the things that caused you to make the decisions that you made to begin with, and so many of these things are so subconscious that you don't know why you may be attracted to a person. It's just that you speak the same language. If you don't learn a different language, if you don't heal, and in some cases going all the way back to, in utero traumas, which have now been shown in psychology circles to be a valid thing. Children before they were even born have been traumatized because of the experiences that their mom has gone through. But if you don't heal from that stuff, you're gonna make the same mistake, because unfortunately, while being in love is an emotional decision, staying in love and commitment is a cognitive decision.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Which, and in many cases, those are in direct conflict with each other, because your emotions are telling you run like hell, but yet your thinking mind is saying you made a commitment, stay.
Mm-hmm.
I have a lot of couples that stay together because it's the right thing to do when they're in a bad place, and it would actually be the wrong thing to do because of their dogma. They don't listen to the warning signs. Other people only listen to their feelings and they abandon their cognitive. You have to know why you're in the marriage, I think,
Mm-hmm.
before you commit to a marriage. Now, producer John over there, you're what, 26?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So I'm 106, so I'm a little older, but what is the driving...
Don't ask me.
I'm going to ask you. He says,
I
ask
don't
me.
know anything.
What is the driving reason why people in your generation decide to couple up in the first place? What do they want more than anything else?
Sex.
Sex. Thank you. Now, being my age, being 60, it wouldn't be on my top 10.
Can she drive after dark?
Can she take me to the doctor? Oh, good.
Can she drive after dark?
Can she drive after dark? Oh, my gosh. Yeah, that's about it. I don't drive after dark anymore. Yeah,
That's why.
How many pieces and parts come off or out before she goes to bed?
No.
We're going to have some serious editing on this one.
No, I'm not going to edit that out. That's good. How many pieces or parts come out when they go to bed?
Some people have teeth like the stars. They come out at night.
I wish mine would. I'm going to get some of those. I'm going to get teeth I can send to the dentist instead of have to go. That's so funny. Once again, I've lost my train of thought. I wonder why.
Do it over.
Yeah, do it over.
Wait, was that the wrong answer? Was that too harsh?
Your answer is perfect. His and hers are scary because
Because they're true?
Yes. And James is right. These new chairs are terribly uncomfortable. That's okay. I won't be sitting in them forever.
And every time I move, I sound like I'm farting.
Yeah, I know. We're not going to cut that part out either. James will say something really important at the same time he's moving. Next time that happens, we'll just point at Kathy and go,
It wasn't me.
yeah, these are not.
It was Haley.
It was Haley. But they don't take up much room. Where were we? Do-over. So doing over is not doing the same thing. Wrong over. Doing over is...
Maybe.
Well, it could be. I mean, that's common, right? That's why
it's actually more the rule than the exception.
Yeah, people bring their pathology into the new relationship, and the other person brings their pathology into the new relationship, and now you're back to your multiplicative. Two very defective people are really messing up.
But they're hoping somebody else is going to fix what's wrong in their life.
Yeah.
They hope you don't.
Or you marry a narcissist again, and they feel like that they have nothing necessary to fix, and their goal in life is to fix you.
Yeah, that happens a lot. Narcissism has become a very common word in our society these days because we have
Because it's true.
Well, yeah, it is true, but we've been raising narcissists for a long time now.
That's true.
This is why I'm afraid to go to heaven. I'm afraid everybody gets a participation trophy, and I'm going to feel like I wasted a lot of time.
But as far as isn't narcissism on the spectrum too? When you say about,
Which spectrum?
on a spectrum.
The autism spectrum.
Yeah, the autism. No, that's just you.
No, they say, because there's so many things they say now. Oh, it's on a spectrum. And you think about narcissism too, is the fact that you can look at people. I can look at people in my life and say, boy, that's narcissistic, but they're a good person. But they still have some narcissistic tendencies in them.
Yeah.
And I think we all do.
Well, narcissism gets a bad rap because but most people use the word narcissism, they're talking about a very narrow diagnostic category of narcissistic personality disorder or the features of that. But narcissism really just means self-love. And healthy self-love is absolutely necessary to have healthy relationships. If you don't love you completely, then you're going to try to find someone to complete you. And that's the old myth you used to hear. Well, he or she completes me. Or I'm looking for someone to complete me. Soulmate.
Your song of the truly desperate.
The truly desperate. If you love yourself completely, you don't need other people, but you sure enjoy being around them.
Yeah.
And they'll enjoy being around you. And that's when you get healthy marriages, healthy relationships. But a narcissist in an unhealthy form either has a big hole in their soul that they're requiring other people to fill, or they have deluded themselves into believing that they are a certain way and they're not, and then they rely on everybody around them to help them maintain that facade. But it's all about getting what they want from someone else. And so that's unhealthy narcissism.
Getting.
Well, and what you just said is such an enigma and a mystery. In order to be able to enjoy people, you have to be to a place where you don't need people.
Exactly.
Which seems completely counterintuitive. But it's really true. It's sort of like, a refrigerator doesn't make cold. It absorbs heat. And in the absence of heat, it's cold.
Really?
Yes. There's so many things in life, that are just completely opposite of what you would expect them to be based on conventional wisdom. If you really, really need people, then you probably aren't in a position yet and healthy enough to be in a relationship.
Well, that's like, it's hard to enjoy having money if you're desperately needing money. Because when you desperately need money, you don't want to part with it. And when you do part with it, you grieve it. When you don't need it, you can enjoy it. When we need something, it becomes a scarcity, a resource that we are very desperate to have or very desperate to hang on to. Like I have, how many kids? I have a lot of kids. And over the years, my wife and I fostered a lot more. And I always had an abundance of kids. I didn't need more kids, but I sure enjoyed having them around. Last thing I needed was another kid because usually we had anywhere between 5 and 9 in the house. Wow. And we had another home next door with another 4. So dinner was kind of fun. I enjoyed it. We had like the grand, I can be the king in front of the, the dais and the whole bit. We had like 16 people. It was a lot of fun. My wife didn't enjoy that part so much, but I didn't need more kids, but I sure enjoyed having them around because it wasn't a deficit for me. Right now, my needs are not the things I enjoy. The things I enjoy are the things I already have in abundance. So I think I never thought about the refrigerator thing, but okay, so expound on that a little bit. So the refrigerator doesn't make cold, but it absorbs heat. How do we use that as an analogy for being enough or being not requiring from others? Because you threw that out there and I wasn't quite sure what you meant.
Well, the point is that if you feel like you need to be in a relationship, that's a surefire sign that you shouldn't be in one.
Because you're going to take from it.
Because you're going to take from it. You're not in a position to give. And so, and when all you do is take, then there's nothing left.
This is why he's the smart guy. Okay, so I meant that in a nice way, James. The smartest guy in the room, smart guy, not the smart guy like my teenagers. So what you're saying is like in the refrigerator, it can't give cold. All it can do is take heat to make it be what it wants to be.
Exactly.
And so heat has to give something up to be in a relationship with the refrigerator. So in a relationship where somebody is in a deficit, they can't produce. All they can do is take to create what they want to make.
Yeah.
I like that.
And there's never enough there.
Yeah.
See,
only God can create something from nothing. Everybody else has to use what's available.
Create something from nothing. So create love out of deficit is not something we have the capacity to do.
No.
And so it's to me, it's not love there. You know, it's
need.
It's need. But we can confuse need with love. You think you love this person because when you first meet them, they give you. When we first get into a relationship, we give a lot. We do take, but we are also giving a lot because we want to pull that person, in.
We're fishing is what we're doing.
Yes. And so, but when you don't have something, eventually that part of it goes away. The infatuation goes away. And then you start to see the people for what they really are. And you start to see yourself for what you really are, maybe. And so at that point in time, and the thing is, even in healthy relationships, that can happen. You got this relationship going, and you say, well, this person didn't do the dishes, or this person didn't do this or do that, or didn't answer. And with the lost my train of thought again. Shoot, darn.
I'm going to be the stereotypical new grandparent and brag on my grandson. So he came out to see us at Christmas. He was just barely 6 months old. I was telling my mom the other night, I had forgotten because my youngest biological child is now 27. It's been a long time since I've had an infant. This is my first biological grandchild. And I was telling her, I forgot what it's like to pick up this brand new baby who I've never seen before and look at him and just fall in love. Mm-hmm. And that baby didn't do anything or ask anything for me to fall in love. That is love. That is not needing. That is not projecting. He's not doing anything. There's nothing I can do for him either. Falling in love with someone in reality isn't about what someone does or doesn't do for you. It's about your spirits touching. Mm. But we look at love in terms of what are they doing for me? How do they make me feel? Mm-hmm. How are they completing this deficit for me? How much do I enjoy them? How sexy are they? Mm-hmm. Do they drive after dark? I won't forget that. That will go down in the annals of podcast history for me. Do they drive after dark, and how many parts come out before they go to bed? Or in my case, how many things you have to strap on your face before you go to sleep? Because that's probably a day killer too, I would imagine. I have to wear CPAP to sleep.
Yeah.
Even my dog doesn't like me when I sleep because of the noise. Darth Vader, right?
Yes, Jim has one. Yeah.
I've gotten used to it, but my dog still, when I put it on, he gets mad and gets off the bed. So I need a woman that doesn't take too many things off, can drive at night, will take me to the doctor I need to, and doesn't mind sleeping next to Darth Vader.
Yeah, there you go. Okay. That can go in your profile.
That'll go in my profile, along with, doesn't mind a little shiny, overactive halo. Mm-hmm. I've lost my train of thought too, so that's too. It's your turn. Smart one of the master.
Well, I lost mine. I was trying to find the track again.
What's your shirt say, by the way? I can't read it.
Oh, it's a Tennessee type.
It's a sports shirt.
Yeah, it's an old shirt.
I thought he sent you the message.
No.
Okay.
So as far as it's do-overs.
Do-overs. What are you doing over? Are you doing your mistakes over, or are you going to take it as an opportunity to do it right?
Yeah.
When you're born again, do you go back and do all the sin again, or you take it as an opportunity to wipe the slate clean and start living a different life? Mm-hmm.
Well, probably one of the biggest do-overs, if you want to call it that I have seen over the course of the years of 18 years of being involved with divorce care. The biggest do-over I've seen that's had the biggest impact on people is their relationship with God. The trauma they've gone through with divorce and everything, and as they heal, if they're taking that healing path, brings them into a closer relationship with God. And so they wouldn't let that, if they didn't have that. And so I've heard them say, as bad as this hurt me, as much as I didn't want to do this, you know what? Because this happened to me, where I am at right now in my life, it's so wonderful because of my relationship that I have now with God. And that do-over, they carry forth into future relationships. And so we have that relationship with God and his unconditional love, because he loves us no matter what. There's nothing we can do to make him love us any less. There's nothing we can do to make him love us any more. Imagine being able to love a person in that way. You know, imagine a person loving you in that way and you really believing it, that this person loves you so much. There's nothing you can do to block that. I don't know if a human being is capable of that, but God is. So that do-over in your relation, the biggest do-over is I've touched on this before, is your relationship with God.
That's how we are supposed to learn relationship in the first place. And if you think about it, James brought up The Shack earlier. He and I both read and watched The Shack recently because we both liked the movie. I never read the book till recently. What I like about that story is it shows how God is in relationship with himself. And he demonstrates through how he can be in relationship with himself completely. He doesn't need us.
No.
But he wants to be with us anyway. And so he teaches us how to be in relationship with him. And in learning how to be in relationship with him, we learn how to be in relationship with ourselves, because we have multiple manifestations of our own self. And when we get those two things right, it's really easy to be in relationship with another person.
Yeah, because you don't feel threatened by them. You don't, you know, if like this is, if they're cranky, you don't take it personally, which is, I don't know, I'm still working on that.
Well, like you said earlier, we can't do it perfectly.
No.
But it's so much better. I and you can ask producer John back there, I never get cranky and I never overreact. But I used to. Is he awake? Yeah, he's giving me a hard
I like the look.
Did you see that
Take
look?
a picture of that look, John.
I don't have a camera. He's got my camera. That's the look Stewie gives on Family Guy. I still get upset. I still get impatient, but I come down from it pretty darn quick. When I was, unfortunately, when I was married towards the end, if something set me off, I stewed in it. I stayed in it. I nurtured it. I justified it. I wanted other people to see my righteous anger and indignation, and that was important to me. And by maintaining how others saw me, I did not have to look at myself.
Yep. And when we come out of a marriage, a lot of times when we're going through the divorce process, especially if you're the one that has been left, you have that mindset. You know, I as far as wanting people to see that this person did this to you, and you want every person in that room to agree with you.
Sometimes you want your kids to agree with you, which
and
is also
that
bad.
is so sad.
Yeah.
That is so sad when when parents do that to their kids, where they want to say, you know, they want the kids to realize that, and that's something I've seen again and again too. And sometimes those relationships are repaired and other times those aren't.
But it's a failure to look in self that allows you to continue to look to others to either solve or somehow represent in a way that makes you feel better. But if you come out of a divorce with the goal of getting the right information, understanding and looking at your contribution, not the other person's, which is hard. But, 12 years ago, I never thought of myself as at fault. Well, today I know I was very much at fault for a lot that went wrong in my marriage. A lot. I would think that I would do it differently this time around if I did it. But I had to sit and look at that and recognize, how did I get there? How did I go from the person who had high ideals in a marriage to the person who desperately wanted to get out of it?
So what is interesting is we've been away, we've had varying number of years between us of being away from that marriage ending. And so what I'm thinking about right now is if somebody's listening right now to this who is still to use the delicate term we sometimes use, freshly filleted. Now, no, somebody that's just
freshly filleted.
That's how I met Jim.
That's almost as bad as
Jim was
his meat grinder one.
Well, Jim was freshly filleted when I met him.
One of the things that Jesus was complete as a person. He had nothing missing, nothing needed, nothing wanted. He was able to give out of his surplus, not out of his need. And because of that, he had a very, very deep understanding of people's motivations and a very deep understanding of where people were coming from. You can call it discernment. You can call it wisdom, whatever. But a lot of it, I think, was because of the fact that since he had nothing missing, that he was able to see the deficits in other people. In Proverbs says it's that in vain is a snare placed in front of the prey. When you're trying to catch an animal in a snare, you hide it so that they can't see it and they step in it and then they're snatched up and they're caught. One of the things that when you went through and met your first spouse, there were things that you didn't see.
Mm-hmm.
There were things that were not hidden, because if you'd have been with them long enough and if you had been perceptive and if you had been working out of your surplus instead of out of your need, you would have seen them. Everybody else saw them. Some people tried to tell you about them and you wouldn't listen. But I think, you have an opportunity to do that over again. You have an opportunity to heal, to plug the holes in your own bucket so that as people are pouring into you, it just doesn't run out all over the floor. You can eventually get to a point where you have a surplus, where you can then give to others in an altruistic manner so that you have nothing needed, nothing wanted, and nothing missing. When you get at that point, it's really, really, really easy to see the motivation in others. It's really easy to see their deficits. And I'm not talking about seeing them in a critical manner or as a way of accusing them of anything or as a way of trying to manipulate them.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just saying that some of those people would present a real trap for you. And if you're going to do this thing over again, you want to go into it with your eyes wide open. But you can't do that if you don't heal yourself first.
Mm-hmm.
Because what you will see as a deficit now, previous to that, you saw it as them trying to fulfill your need, which translated means them taking control of you in that area because you wanted someone to control you because you felt like you were trying to control yourself.
If your pain, if the flash bang of your pain is so big that all you can see is the blinding light and the concussion in the ears, you cannot see the truth.
Yeah.
We have to first get healed before we can see the truth of the relationship we might want to go into. Otherwise, you're just stumbling around in the dark trying to feel your way, and you're going to make mistakes. Most of us got into a relationship in the first place because something in our life, whether it's pain or maybe fantasy and hope or some paradigm that was so big to us that all we could see was that. Most people when they're dating, they only look at the good.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're not dating and engaged long enough, you end up in a marriage where your expectation is completely based on fantasy.
Mm-hmm.
And then the moment something goes wrong, you're devastated. If you stay with someone long enough to where the relationship can get stressed a few times, you start to see the real person, how that person acts under stress, how you act and react under the same stress, and you start to see reality. But most of us are blinded by either the pain we're trying to recover from or the need we're trying to fill or the belief, the fantasy that we're trying to pursue. No, there's no such thing as happily ever after. And there's no such thing as getting your needs made complete in somebody else. Mm-hmm. There's only one person that can make you complete, and that's Christ. It's not people. Now, I have a wonderful dog, but he doesn't complete me. I would be devastated if he was gone. James has got a nice dog over there that I really like. But my dog doesn't complete me. He's just a companion.
Mm-hmm.
Well, again, to go back to the movie The Shack, God tells the guy that you're trying to make sense of the whole world by only looking through the knothole of your pain. So you don't have, so think about a knothole. How small a knothole is. Imagine trying to look at the entire horizon through a knothole. There's going to be things you can't see because your field of view is so limited. And pain does that to you. Pain, causes you to become myopic. It causes you to become self-absorbed and self-focused. And it changes your interpretation of the data, of even the limited data that you're bringing in. So there is an opportunity to do over. There's an opportunity to heal so that you go out there much wiser, much more discerning, much more giving, much more caring, but also where you're giving out of your surplus instead of taking out of your need.
But I did recover, and I did recover my thought.
About being flayed?
No.
Oh.
No, as far as where I was going with that is the idea. We're talking from a distance of our pain,
Mm-hmm.
but there's some people that may be listening to us right now that are so in that pain,
Mm-hmm.
and they may hear us talking about do-overs, and they can't even grasp it. They can't even grasp what they could, because they are so. It's just in their face right now. What I don't know what to say to them to say it at this point in time, other than the fact that this is something that you may not believe right now, but store this, put this in a file in your brain, because someday you'll be at that place where you can even think of a do-over. Because right now they can't do over because they're so in it. They're not out of it.
Well, but it depends on how you define do-over. And, if you're looking for someone to fall in love with yourself.
Yeah.
Get to know who you are. Go back and figure out where your development stopped.
Mm-hmm.
The person that you were born to be, the person that you were created to be. At some point, you got off the trail. Go back to that part and start over. Do that over. There's a song that I really love. It's by a group called Mercy Me.
Mm.
And it's called Dear Younger Me.
Yes.
And the essence of the song is, he's going back as an adult. And he's talking to himself as a younger child. And he's like, where do I start? If I could tell you all the things that I've learned so far, you'd be so far ahead. But in the song, he talks about that, all this pain, all this suffering, you weren't meant to carry that. You weren't meant to carry that beyond the cross. But yet, that's changed who you are today. You can do that over again. You can let that go. You can let that heal. And you can start to really become the person that you were born to be. I used to think that the worst thing in the world would be to have lived and died and nobody ever really know who you are because you were not in a relationship. I've modified that over the last 6 months. I think the worst thing in the world would be to have lived and died and never know who you are.
That's right.
Yeah. And so a person hearing this that is in such pain right now, the do-over, just one thing they can do right now, even in the pain, that they can maybe take a step out of the pain for just one step out is the key thing. If you can just get yourself one step out of that pain and then keep putting one foot in front of the other. But it's a conscious effort. It's so many things in our lives are a choice. And as strange as it may sound, when a person is in pain, part of the reason they're in pain and the part of the reason they stay in pain is because they choose to. So if you're in pain, if you can engaging that one little part of your brain and saying, I'm going to make a choice today, right now, that I'm going to do something positive for myself, even in this pain. And it can be something small. It could be a matter of taking a walk around the block because you've been sitting for so long. It could be making a phone call to somebody that just so you can reach out because you haven't felt like having any contact with anybody, but kind of almost like forcing yourself, disciplining yourself. I'm in this pain. I'm frozen. I can't move. Because that's a lie.
You have to be willing to break the status quo.
Yeah.
To do something different. And I think it starts with defining what your pain is. And so, we've been talking about in pain here for about the last 15 minutes, but, some people don't define pain the same way I might.
Mm.
What I try to do when I define pain is whatever it is causing me to feel anxious or somehow disconnected or not achieving. Pain can be somebody hurt me. Mm-hmm. Pain could be I let myself down. Mm-hmm. Pain could be I feel lonely because I believe that I'm supposed to be with somebody and it's painful not to be. Pain is definitely subjective. So maybe if you start with defining your pain, and probably the most valuable piece of advice I give people is don't make major life decisions when you're in great pain because your perspective is completely blocked.
Mm-hmm.
But make small decisions to move away from the pain. Start imagining the world different for you.
Mm-hmm.
And what would you do first to take that step? So if you, like I did with the Christmas trees, it seemed like a silly thing. Everybody thought I was silly. But for me, it was a big step because I said, I am going to start a tradition for me that's my choice.
Mm-hmm.
It was like putting a stake in the ground and saying, this is as far back as I go. Everything's going forward from here.
Yeah.
It's a little thing. And I got laughed at. I got to tell you, my family laughed at me for it. So what's the big deal? It was big to me.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I think a big part of this, too, is that you've got to start learning how to forgive yourself.
Mm.
Jesus said, love your neighbor as you love yourself. Okay. And I always looked at that as a command. What I really came to understand is that it's a paradigm. You will love your neighbor as you love yourself.
Mm-hmm.
It's a truth. If you don't love yourself, you won't love your neighbor. If you don't love yourself well, you won't love your neighbor well. It's only out of what flows out of you that you're able to love your neighbor. And and he explained who neighbors were. They're basically everybody's your neighbor.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things that we have on the side of one of our ambulances is neighbors serving neighbors. And that's what we do. The key to learning how to love yourself is that you have to learn how to forgive yourself. And so I remember one day that with my former CEO, that our company was being bought. And before he made the announcement to the executive team that we were being bought by another company, he had everybody take out a piece of paper. And he says, I want every one of you to write down 20 things that you know how to do. And so, I know how to cut the grass. I know how to, fix certain things on a car. I know how to put in an electrical plug. I know how to, and it was all these different things you knew how to do. And then he announced to everyone that the company was being bought and several of the executives there would not be offered a new position. But this point of the exercise was that you think that you are, an accountant. You think that you are a scientist. You are so much more broader than that because look at all this list of things that you know how to do.
Ooh.
Yeah, we have in this pain that you go through, there's a real potential that you define yourself extremely narrowly. And if you're not careful, this pain will become your sole identity. But you're much broader than that. You have many more dimensions to yourself than that. And it starts with saying, here's one thing that I really like about myself, and I wouldn't want to change regardless. And I really love this one thing about myself. And get comfortable with saying that I love myself, if just in one area, and start from there. Because it's only by coming at this from a positive perspective. Here are 5 things I do really well, and here's one thing I need to work on. Well, if I know I do 5 things well, and I've conquered those, well, then I can take the risk to work on the one thing that I don't do quite so well. And I come at it from a position of strength instead of a position of inferiority, and a position of being defective, and a position of being inferior. I learned those 5 things. I can learn this one.
Wow.
And just that perspective really makes a huge difference.
Wow.
So, and then as you learn to love yourself, then you'll learn to love your neighbor.
It's interesting when you said this is why we say he's the smartest guy in the room.
I wish I'd written this all down.
Well, we have it recorded.
Oh, that's right.
That's right. When you said how you love, let's see, how did you say, how you love your neighbor is how you love yourself? You flipped it on its head. It dawned on me, if you can't love and forgive the people in your life that have hurt you, you can't do it for you either. How you treat other people is a direct reflection on how you're treating you.
Exactly.
So if you could see how you are interacting with the world, you can now look at yourself and say, well, what am I doing to me? Because it is an expression of your self-love. I never thought about it from that direction. This guy's smart.
I know.
We should get him on tape.
No, this is just the Holy Spirit just talking.
I've never heard anybody say that, though.
No, but and that to me that I love that idea of the 20 things. You're in pain. Okay, let's sit down and write down 20 things that are positive about yourself, or 5 things that are positive about yourself, or whatever. Just getting that person to start writing down these things that are positive about themselves, not just thinking of it, but the physical aspect of writing them down. I think that is huge. And actually the question that I asked earlier, what do you say to somebody who is listening to this and there's such pain that they can't imagine any of these things could possibly be true? That's one of the suggestions that would be so good for them to do, is sit down and write down 5 things that you do well. And there's actually there's a thing called Strength Finders that people can, that's put out by Gallup, I think it is, that you can take that show you your top 5 strengths in life. And it goes all the way down to 35 that we'll list it like that. But it's just the idea of taking yourself and looking at yourself with a different perspective.
Well, when all this divorce stuff started, I made myself a promise that regardless of what happened, when I got through the end of it, that I would be able to answer with the greatest amount of honesty, that I maintained my integrity and I maintained my honor.
That's key.
That you can take everything away from me, but you will not take my integrity and you will not take my honor. And I put a stake in the sand around those 2 items. I didn't realize at the time how important that was, but that became so incredibly important to me.
Mm-hmm.
And it was the way that I judged every one of my actions, including actions that were maybe not quite so honorable, that I had to go back and apologize for because I was trying to live to the ideal. There are ways to go through this, and this stuff's hard. Okay. Jesus said, in this world, you will have trouble, but be of good cheer. I've overcome the world. You can overcome this. You can start over. You can do it over again. And this time you can do it better. I know when this was kind of done, I sat down and read Cloud and Townsend's book, Boundaries in Marriage. And I looked at that book simply as the answer key to all the places I had screwed up. And I read it intentionally for that purpose. Because I messed up here, I messed up there. Again, didn't realize that at the time. But that was so important in coming to a realization of who I was. Because there are some things that I did really well. And then there are other things that, I totally screwed up.
That list of 20 things or 5 things that you do well, that's a good way of getting off the pain and onto a broader perspective. Get a little,
the way to broaden the knot hole.
Right. Some cognitive complexity. Instead of just seeing the pain, you can also see the blessings. I had one of those books that was meaningful to me. It was not that particular one. It was John Gottman's Why Marriages Succeed or Fail and How to Make Yours Last. I had just left my wife when I got that assigned in school. And I realized I knew exactly what I did wrong, but I also knew exactly what I did right. And I was able then to amplify what I did right, but I was able to start working. And it took me a good 5 years to understand how to overcome what I did wrong.
Yeah, look, the difference between winning and losing can be as small as 51 and 49. But we have a tendency to look at it as 0 and 100.
That's because we look at our happiness meter, and if it's not pegged at happy, we think we're miserable.
Yeah. And so, you probably, even though you may feel like you're a total reprobate, you probably did a lot of stuff right.
Yeah, that's
The difference in the balance was 49 and 51. The other thing is that you had somebody else on that balance with you, and you couldn't control them.
Right.
So you may have been 60-40. You may have been 70-30. The percentages don't matter. The point is that you're not completely devoid of any value.
And one of the things that when we're in pain and we start to sit there and think of 5 good things, we're also, aren't we moving from the amygdala up to the thinking brain?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And sometimes just that action, it's amazing what that does.
It grounds you back to reality.
Mm-hmm.
Pain has a way of taking you out of reality, and you
Mm-hmm.
get stuck in the feeling, which is a very primitive way of thinking.
Mm-hmm.
But when you move yourself to the cognitive, you come back to reality. It's grounding you.
Mm-hmm.
So, final thoughts, guys. We'll even let producer John have a thought in a minute. That's a warning, John. You come up with something.
Final thoughts. Final thought would be, where somebody is at right now, the pain that they're in right now, believe it or not, God said this too shall pass. He didn't say this too shall stay. But self-love, right now, even just taking your arms and wrapping your arms around yourself and saying, right now, the pain that you're in, you're not going to say it. You're not going to be there forever. And acknowledging the fact, and maybe final thought is to go ahead and do that writing down business there, and keep putting one foot in front of the other. Reach out to others. Don't do this alone, and do some research. Read some books.
Knowledge
reading
will address a lot.
Reading books is that was the thing that got me through when this first all came about, was reading.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Most of the classes I took in grad school would tell us, the first thing they tell you, is the history of whatever you're learning. I said, why do I have to learn all this history? When you understand where you've come from,
mm-hmm.
you have a really good perspective of where you're going.
Mm-hmm.
And the more we learn, the less the negative or less the pathologies or less the problems have control over us, because now we have something that we can put outside of ourselves and kick around rather than have it inside as a mystery. It's externalizing the problem. James, parting thoughts.
God made you. God knows you. And He knows you as you truly are. He's deemed you worthy of love. He's deemed you worthy of freedom. He's deemed you worthy of peace. You have to start to replace how you view yourself with how God views you. Because He doesn't see you the same way you see yourself. He sees you as being precious. He sees you as being holy. He sees you as being designed for a purpose. He sees you as being unique. He sees you as being worthy of redemption. And regardless of how you may feel about yourself at the moment, and believe me, I know because I've been there, it's just not the truth. The pain will lie to you. You got to start telling yourself the truth, because the truth will set you free.
Mm-hmm.
You left one out. God sees you complete. He
Mm-hmm.
sees you in your completion. He knows this comes to pass. He knows that this will pass. The pain today is not going to be the only thing in our lives in the future. He knows how the story ends. He's already orchestrated it. And what we think we're seeing is just a little piece in the moment. He sees us in completion.
And if you can start to capture just a small part of that vision, it'll give you hope. It'll give you something to move forward and towards. And all of this will just be a great learning exercise that'll make you wiser and more loving and more kind and more like Christ in the future. So don't get stuck here, because you're walking through the valley of the shadow of death, but you got to keep walking.
And hopefully at the end, you'll be able to do like some of us have already been able to say, is it was an awful, awful journey, But I'm so glad I went through it because I wouldn't be who I am today if I hadn't gone through that valley. That's hard to imagine when you're in the pain, but on the other side of it, it's reality. You segued into next week, which we're going to be talking about the new story. Seeing that James has just described, and how do you move to it? What is that future? How do we get there? What is a practical way to activate it? That's going to be our final podcast on this topic, and I'm excited about that one.
Oh, I know the answer to that one.
Jeremiah 29:11.
That's part of it. But it's also, Paul says, set aside, every weight that so easily prevents you from getting where you're supposed to be.
We're going to have fun.
Amen.
Counselors on the Couch is brought to you by Virginia Beach Christian Counseling, specialists in family counseling, grief, trauma, and loss. Find us at www.virginiabeachchristiancounseling.com. Counselors on the Couch is produced and directed by John Bell, executive producer Dr. Chuck Carrington, with original music score and mastering by John Tyler Music. The opinions expressed here are of the host and the individual guests and are not necessarily the opinion of Virginia Beach Christian Counseling. If you would like to make a comment or would like to ask to be a guest, please go to counselorsonthecouch.com.